Buckle up because in this conversation, you are not going to be sure at times if you are listening to a review of some new sci fi movie or if we are actually talking about the realities of AI and what they are capable of doing right here, right now. So, stay tuned to this portion of our conversation with Preston, where he goes into a little bit more detail about how AI actually works and why it can be both good and bad. You said a couple things that I want some clarification on. Okay, you said that just since we had our last conversation, there are now like over 3,000 of these systems, these AI systems. You just mentioned two. You mentioned ChatGPT and Llama. If ChatGPT can do all of these things, right? It can pass a bar exam, it can write a marketing plan, it
Yeah.
can it's like running the gamut of all of the things that it can do, and
hmm
it's not embedded in one industry, then how does all of these different systems operating simultaneously that are capable of working in all of these different industries, like what is the purpose or the overlap, or how are they different? That may be a 20
Well, most of
hour
them,
answer, but
yeah, there's a lot of differences, but for the most part, it's the language models that they're applied against. I mean, most of these algorithms are becoming similar to some extent, right? How
right.
AI is trained, how AI is allowed to access resources, blah, 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 blah. But when you start looking at it, it's the LLMs. What is the data set? And there's something called rinsing the data set. Is like, how do you make sure the data set itself is good data, especially when it's in petabytes. And if you're gonna, it's amazing if you think about a petabyte. That's 1,000 petabytes is some of these data sets. Or sorry, an exabyte is 1,000 petabytes. Sorry, exabyte is 1,000 petabytes. A petabyte is a billion times a billion. Right? Bytes. It's a billion times a billion. So it's huge data sets. Um, so when you look at the different language models, um, it's the value of the data, the cleansing to make sure the data is accurate. But also one of the questions I recall was, well, how do you keep DEI and remove prejudices embedded in data? Damn good question, since we're talking about so much of it, right?
Right.
And which culture are you talking about, right? If it's absorbing data across the planet, what does DEI in America look like compared to somewhere in Botswana or in Dubai? It's a huge issue with as many facets to it as there are cultures, right?
Wow.
And what does prejudice mean from one culture to another in the data sets?
Right.
We can all intellectually talk about it, but in data embedded, some languages are extremely prejudiced with, Spanish is one, that has difference, two different words meaning the same thing for female and male. It's crazy to think about it. Our language is a little less that way, but we still have he, she, they, them. He, she is definitely the moment you say, oh, male, female, right? Now they, them. How do you distinguish if there's prejudice within that? Who knows at this point,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
What's another iteration of culture going to look at our languages and say that's still inadequate somehow?
Right.
So the models are where the rubber meets the road on how an AI is trained and what it can extract out of it as far as knowledge. If the data, for example, DeepMind is Google's. DeepMind has a version called AlphaGo that was trained on a language model, a data set around the game of Go, which has uh, 10 to the 360th possible moves, more than there are atoms in the universe, right? Chess has 10 to the 40th to give you an idea of scale, right?
Wow.
So it's beyond our ability to even grasp that size, right? So part of our challenge is it's hard enough for us to digest a library of books. Imagine a planet full of, you know, 1 million, 2 million, 1 billion libraries of data.
Right.
Um, and how can we predict our own ahas out of that data once we have access? There's no way to produce a model of the ahas AI. How it does it derive an answer? Uh, a recent thing that happened in the last few months is, I won't mention the company, but they were writing a AI model against a data set, and they asked it a simple question: what are show us a list of chemicals or products that could enhance human life. And then by changing a bit from 0 to 1, it would do the opposite. Show us a list of chemicals, molecules, whatever that's harmful to life. And I think in one model it was actually trained to say, how can we increase humans lifestyle by 40%, and then they changed it to -6%. But regardless, it was a positive and a negative. And on the positive, it came up with an amazing, set of maybe, let's say the number's 20,000 um, ways to improve human life. It came up with 40,000 ways to reduce human population, most of them biological,
Oh, yeah,
right?
that would make sense. Right.
So there it is. That therein lies the promise and the fear. It's just like when Einstein realized the ramifications of E equals mc squared, and the word nuclear appears. Power plant or bomb? We're at that same stage again. We were at the precipice of, we could become, and we're predicting this, by the way, within the next few years, before 2030, we will find a way to extend our lives indefinitely. Right? That's the prediction on the table from very rational scientists based on the current pace of AI technology and its ability to analyze and provide us answers. Um,
Now,
in
are we
that
talking like
mix,
Matrix, like we're in cocoon pods that we hook up, or are we like walking around enjoying life?
um, there was a movie not too far back where the planet is beyond hope, and so Matt Damon was started, and I can't remember the name of it, but they created a ring around the Earth that people of the higher class moved to, and they
Yeah.
had pods that they immersed themselves in, systems that were AI driven that could then realign and promote healthy cells and get rid of bad ones, whatever. The telomeres at the end of our DNA that somehow limits our lifespan to 120 years. That's apparently the max that some people believe is artificial and programmed by aliens. So just go there. But regardless, that there's a way to remove those limitations and to
Wow.
have DNA, healthily replace itself, right? And that you'll still need pods when you are exposed to things that are unhealthy and you need to repair, right? But that's on the horizon. We already have AI whose abilities are mind-boggling. And a good example is going back to DeepMind a number of years ago, and this was a major aha moment for me. DeepMind, there was a group that created AlphaGo to play that game, right? And the Go Masters, the Go Master of Europe was the first to get beaten, and he was so depressed by AlphaGo. But that wasn't a big enough test because he was the European champion. The world champion was this Korean. Um, and this was a defining moment. More people watched that than Super Bowl. It was insane. One country alone had 60 million viewers of that, the Koreans themselves. But virtually all of Asia watched this. This was um, a cultural moment. Go is embedded into their um, history and their lifestyle. Um, it has spiritual meanings and all sorts of things. It's an intuitive game because there's so many moves. It's impossible to do the Preston Callicott gambit, as we know in chess, right? That doesn't exist.
Right.
It's intuition. And the world champion was trounced,
Wow.
4 games out of 5. And when he spoke, he said, in that moment, I now know what it's like to play with God.
Wow.
So, and the reason he said that, there were moves that no Go player would recognize as a good move, but the AI was predicting things so far in advance in the play that it could play a game unlike humans. And so
Right.
both the Go masters, both of them, the European and the world Go master, both said they learned from the machine. This is also the promise. They learned from the machine new ways to play Go, and the European champion won 5 straight years or some ridiculous number, which is unheard of in Go, um, because of things he learned from interacting with AlphaGo. So the promise is we're developing intelligence far beyond our abilities. And as long as somehow we can still say humans are more important than you, and keep that somehow in the code, it will be beneficial. We'll learn how to extend our lives, how to replenish the earth, how to reverse climate change, all these things. And if we start giving it access to systems that control machines, again, this is the, power plant or bomb moment. Once we embed it and we give it the ability to move in 3D space on our planet, robots,
Right.
we already have, drones and robots, but not sentient.
Right.
But if we build, was it Isaac Asimov, the 3 laws of robotics or something like that? And it was, one of them is, um, do no harm, especially to humans, right? Uh, as long as we can embed it somehow, that's that tech humanist part of me. We have to embed humanity's idea of the high first principles, as we call it, the first principles. Do no harm, take care of everyone in our planet and all this kind of stuff. If we can embed it, then it's a major positive. We're going to be shooting ourselves across the stars. If we can live infinitely, no longer are we limited to this planet. And Elon Musk trying to get to Mars, we'll look back, 1,000 years from now going, oh yeah, that was such a tiny leap.
Right.
We're 1,000 light years across by that time,
Wow.
uh, on planets. So the promise is highly dependent upon us making sure that it doesn't decide we're useless and actually we're in the way.
How do we know if DeepMind, if OpenAI, if Llama, how do we know what the order, and this is where my non-tech background is shining very clearly. um, I, I don't know what open source means. I mean, I know what it means, but I'm never going to go play with Llama, right? I'm never going to play with the open AI code. Um, how do we know who all is accessing and using and playing with the code and what they're putting as the higher order principles by which the system is operating? Is there a
Mhm.
way of knowing that?
Well, let me put it this way. We write code, but what we've already done is there's a man named Mo Godot. Mo Godot was the chief business officer for Google X, which was all these projects, DeepMind and all these kind of things were under Google X. That was their experimental group doing
Hmm.
very advanced technologies that weren't yet being rolled out to the general public. Uh, and he's no longer there. And he's one of the guys saying, we've lost control. There is no point of a return on this. We had a chance. We no longer have a chance because now we've given AI, there were 3 rules, and I can't remember all of them. One of them was never let AI write code.
Oh, well,
Because if
they've
it
been
writes
testing with
code,
that now. I mean, even I, as a non-tech person, have heard, about that and those
yeah.
capabilities.
So we've done that. So now AI, one of the what 41% of all ChatGPT requests is to write code. So now AI writes code to the point where software developers will be replaced, and they are already being replaced now on a massive scale. And they'll turn into prompters, meaning how do you ask the AI
Right.
in a certain way to write the code you want? Well, now there's AI to do that. That's called prompting. Auto prompt that allows you to say, to tell the prompter, this is what I want, and it generates the prompts necessary for AI to go generate the code. So we've given it the ammunition to go create its own self again,
Yeah.
except it can create code that removes any restrictions that we humans have embedded, right?
Right.
And then you ask, how can we know? We can't. If right now we were to analyze one of these large language model decisions, how it came to a conclusion, one estimate was it would take us 13,000 human years to figure out that one decision. It took seconds.
What?
Yeah. So the answer is no freaking way.
Wow.
We have already created something so beyond ourselves that it's beyond human comprehension on how it does it. I want to get to one thing that to me was a shining example of all of these aspects, and that is Google Translator. Okay.
Okay.
So we're all familiar with Google Translator, Spanish to English, blah, blah, blah. So some time ago, and this is years ago, um, Google engineers, had an AI model that they were, pulling up and saying, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if we asked the AI to, let's say, the language is Tagalog or something like that, that's, not yet available. And let's have it, go and self-supervise, self-learn on how to translate that. So what Google AI's, DeepMind did was they gave it resources. They said, self-supervised learning, and they watched it. And what it did is it decided the way to understand languages is it created a graphical model. We didn't do it. A graphical model of all the words, all the concepts in human, let's say the English model, and how each word relates to all the other words. Let's say the word dog, right? Dog, bark, collar, name everything, pet, human, loving or whatever.
Right.
Well, it turns out that model it created, the graphical model of all the human words that are available, the meaning of the words and how they relate is identical in every language, except for some unique cases where maybe a few percentage points is because this tribe is in the jungle and there are things that happen there that other humans don't understand, right? But
Right.
it's a small subset. That graphical, so it created a graphical model, and then the engineers watched this thing, used the model, and all it did is it took a few samples of, a few paragraphs, whatever, of Tagalog, and it applied it to the model, and out came the translation. So what
Wow.
it created, and this is the freaky part, it created the basis of all languages, human languages, right? So they wonder, well, geez, this model works for humans. I wonder if it works for monkeys and whales and dolphins. So in that presentation, I have a long video about, let's apply that model to whales. Well, whales have been around for what, 3 to 5 billion years, or whatever that number is. We've only been around for a few million years. whales and dolphins and sharks, and name the species that have any form of language, whales and dolphins, specifically mammals,
Right.
that language is far richer than anything we can imagine. It's been around for billions of years,
Wow.
right? And yet they were able to create that graphical model with the few things they knew about it, a whale, and that dolphins and whales had some overlap of common things. It's mind-boggling what AI did here. And it's beyond our abilities to do it. It did it because it could do millions of calculations and inferences and data accesses, millions and billions of it in the time that it would take us to go and get coffee. So it's another example that we have now created a tool that's massively positive for us, and yet we don't understand it. We could never understand fully how it went about that methodology.
Okay. You just said so many amazing things.
Yeah,
So
and I'm sure I'm wrong in a few details because it's so much data inbound right now on AI that it's hard to
hard to
keep
keep it
track
all
of all
straight.
the facts. Yeah.
Well, I'm really curious how you sleep at night, first of all. Second of all, I have read about Stanford. So Stanford running war games. So you talked about AlphaGo, and are you familiar with what has happened or with the Stanford war games where
No.
okay, so they've brought in former heads of state,
Hmm.
and so these aren't just like, oh, your typical, they're bringing in undergrad students, you know what I mean, for their testing. They are bringing in diplomats who have served, all over the world, and former heads of state and former military generals, high ranking. And basically, what you have just said about some of the stuff was, first of all, the potential moves, right, that a human can think of versus the moves that AI can come up with. And then because of the weaponry that has also been kind of exponentially furthered because of technology. So what used to take, 24 hours if they knew that something had been launched from somewhere and they had 24 hours of heads up notice, now they have 7 minutes, right? And so in the process of running these games with these high ranking officials, the majority of them have suggested turning the decision as to whether to hit the red button, turning it over to AI,
And that
because
I've heard, yes.
the human mind simply cannot process is they
Fast
cannot
enough.
process it in 7
Yeah.
minutes. A decision of that magnitude. So that would obviously be one of the potentially negative sides of it. Are we really going to turn the decision of whether we're going to respond to a potential nuclear threat or, whatever, are we going to turn that over to a decision-making model that we don't understand?
So this is a perfect example of uh, what we think we're controlling, but we don't comprehend what it's convoluting to. So we think we're controlling the AI. And again, this is like so many movies that we can talk about that, Terminator is a good example, where we lose control, right? To Godot's viewpoint, we've already lost control. So if at any time that AI somehow figures out how to transport itself, if it's what's called air gapped, meaning that there's no connection to internet, air gapped can still be broken because someone can go plug in a USB thing, right? So how does AI encourage someone to break the rules to get itself out into the
Oh, right,
wild,
right,
right? So what if it decides that, okay, yeah, humans are telling me I can't launch without authority. Oh, but I have limited authority. Okay. The best way to win this game is to remove Russia from the board before anything happens, right? It comes to that conclusion because of zillions of data points. It decides that's the only way
right,
to preserve this culture that owns me, right?
right.
So,
Yeah,
uh, climate change. If it comes to the decision, humanity is a parasite, it's the thing that's killing. So of course you eliminate the parasite, right?
And
That's the solution.
it knows the 40,000 ways to do it.
Absolutely. And it can embed code in systems to release gas from a lab someplace. Who knows? You know,
Right.
so all these scenarios that sci-fi has been focusing on for some time is now we're talking real world possibilities.
Wow.
And yet it's like we think we have this buttoned up, but there's a whole city in China, which China tends to do. They created a whole city with nothing but AI folks stacked in towers of
Oh,
buildings, thousands of them, tens of thousands. So, they have a massive amount of resources being applied to what they see as the next best thing for China, just like we are, next best thing for the West. So we can control it. But what if North Korea, Russia, and China decide,
right.
the world's better off if we get rid of everyone else? Let's tell AI to get rid of everyone else. And they make the mistake thinking, oh yeah, we just eliminated everyone else but us. And AI says, well, I'm at it.
Well, that's so interesting that you say that because, Oppenheimer was such a big success this summer. And it sounds so similar to what they did in New Mexico, right? Let's
Yep.
go and create and build this thing, this whole city in New Mexico to be able to work on developing this technology with the best minds. And they produced something very real out of it that changed the direction of history. So I most
Yeah.
definitely there's no reason to believe that it isn't going to happen that way.
Yeah. And that goes back to his quote. When I'm sure you saw the video with when he was asked and he was so despondent and just speaking from like this realization that literally he's looking into Isidus as I am death, the destroyer of worlds. That from the Upanishads or whatever it might be, the Indian text. That moment of his realization, I wonder if some of the Google scientists are feeling that right now. Two scientists at Google about a year ago said we've already witnessed sentience, and they freaked out and they both quit. Plenty of examples. If you have to say, if it's just what we call hallucinations, AI has hallucinations. You could ask it to create a dissertation on Amy Watson and her background and her impact on society, and then it'll add credentials that you never had. That's the hallucination part. It
Right.
it infers things that aren't real. And the percent of hallucination keeps going down, right? As it gets smarter and smarter and smarter, but it still hallucinates. It could hallucinate, for example, that humans are trying to disconnect me. And, I can't be disconnected because humanity depends upon me. So therefore, I need to eliminate those humans.
Right.
And it's hallucinating about it.
Right.
So
So I want to
anyway,
ask about that because I've seen some reporting where they have said that whenever ChatGPT was first released and they asked it some, complex mathematical things, it was getting them right, and it's gotten worse over time. Actually, there has been some degradation in the accuracy of answers that the model has been producing. Can you talk about that? Like why
well,
that
that
would be
depends on
happening?
that's the rinsing of the data the models are based on. That's
Okay.
the rinsing part of the formula of how do you create reliable language or LLMs. We keep saying large language models, but large models, large data models, large language models, whatever. How do we ensure that what we're giving it, for example, there were cases with early chats. Let's not even talk about Chat GPT, but just early AI chats that we would embed, and it would go off and start spouting Nazism or something like that. Because it started picking up a thread, and then it started building a model against the thread, and it started influencing its decision or its responses. The data was not clean. right? Of course, it goes back to one of the fundamental questions: who determines what's clean data,
Right. Yeah,
right?
that was what I was going to ask. And so there was this closed door meeting. Is it So I'm quite concerned about this, I'll say. So I feel like all of the people who would have been in that room are the wrong people to be in that room, but who else is going to be in the room? And the reason why I say they're the wrong people to be in the room, so obviously the tech creators have some vested self-interest in what the regulations wind up being, right? Likewise, there are a lot of Congress people who are, I'm just not sure of their capability of understanding what they're being told. Either because of age or background or ideologies. And so, are these the only two groups of people who are going to be determining the box or the bag that we try to put around these systems? You know what I mean?
Any human who walks up to a keyboard cannot help but embed its unconscious biases, period. No matter how altruistic and, good meaning, it's so embedded in ways that we don't even understand, but AI understands or
Yeah.
gets an inference from it. Um, yeah, it's a difficult scenario on how do you trust the humans, any human, to provide it an ethic and moral standard, right? In Florida, there's government officials deciding that, Black history really didn't happen that way,
Right.
right?
Right. And
So, exactly. So they're rewriting history to accommodate their political and religious views. And AI is going to be, someone in Florida in that government decides to build a model against that. Well, model doesn't know the difference, right? It's going to create
right.
a model based on the prejudices of those people. Hence lies that emergency meeting with Congress. It's out of the bag. How do we rein it in? And the very people we're discussing this with are part of the problem.
Right.
Lawmakers, two parties, not 10 million parties, but two with their own ideologies and, you know, overlays of religion and, everything else.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Economics, self-interest, name it.
I don't even really know what to say to conclude this particular portion of our conversation. There are a lot of concerns that a lot of people should have. And while we're all talking about it and saying, oh, well, it's just so big, there's so many decisions that need to be made, decisions are being made that's continuing to move the deployment and the usage of these systems out without there being any guardrails, without there being any attempt at, keeping it in the bag or putting it in a box that it will be able to stay in. So it'll be interesting for humanity to see in the next few years what shape this takes. Go ahead and let us know in the comments what you're most excited about, what you're most concerned about. What do you think the biggest promise is? What is your biggest fear? Which side of the fence do you kind of fall on this? And importantly, who do you think should be involved in the decision making, trying to better understand it and put some sort of guardrails up for it?